Well, good morning, brethren. Good to see you all again, and also to those who are joining in on Zoom today. Now, so far in this mini-series on the Holy Land, we've explored all over the land of Israel, culminating in the capital city of Jerusalem. Now, today I'll be finishing our virtual tour of the Holy Land by exploring the land of Jordan. Now, much of northern and central Jordan was part of ancient Israel, and much biblical history took place in those areas as well. Now, most of the fertile inhabited land of the Transjordan Plateau is situated within about 50 kilometres of the Jordan River and the Arabah Valley as you head down further south past the Dead Sea. Now, the western part of the Transjordan Plateau can be broken into various sections separated by various rivers that cut through the plateau and empty into the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Now, as seen in the map on the left, the top two regions of Gilead and the Central Plateau were a part of ancient Israel. Now, Gilead, which is a name that means sort of mountainous, was a fairly mountainous plateau region shared by the tribes of Manasseh and Gad. Now, the Central Plateau on the northeastern side of the Dead Sea was a lot more flatter region, and it was given to the tribe of Reuben. Now, the nation of Ammon was situated further east of Gad's inheritance, centred around today's Jordanian capital city of Amman. Now, further south, the nation of Moab was situated on the southeastern side of the Dead Sea, between the Arnon River and the Zered Brook, near the bottom of the Dead Sea. Now, Ammon and Moab were descended from Lot's sons, while Edom was descended from Jacob's brother Esau. Now, they were all related to the Israelites and were often vassal states controlled by Israel, who sought control of the vital trade routes of the King's Highway. Now, the northern border of Jordan is the Yarmuk River, just a little south of the Sea of Galilee. The Jabbok River bisects that region of Gilead and played an important part in the story of Jacob, and was halfway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Now, additionally, you have the plain of the Jordan River, which expands to a circular shape near the top of the Dead Sea, and this area is called the Plains of Moab. Now, originally it was part of the nation of Moab before the Amorites under Sihon conquered the area sometime just before the Israelites came through on their way to the Holy Land. Now, the Israelites in turn then conquered the Amorites. Now, if we look at the Exodus route from Kadesh, the Israelites likely intended to go up Wadi Dana to get onto the King's Highway, but they were denied permission to go through both Edom and then Moab. Now, they had to go all the way back down to the Gulf of Aqaba to connect up with the Way of the Wilderness to go around the Jordanian mountains of Mount Seir, and then go around the east of the lands of Edom and Moab. Now, today that road is called the Desert Highway, or Highway 15. Now, when we went there, I was keen to follow the route of the Israelites as much as possible when we were there, but we did have to split off from it to go along the King's Highway to get down to Petra. Now, after heading further north along the King's Highway, we actually then descended down into the bottom of the Dead Sea to go along the Zered Brook, and we also visited a likely site for the place of Sodom. Now, from there, we then headed due east to connect back up to the Way of the Wilderness, and then we followed the route of the Israelites all the way to Mount Nebo. Now, we crossed into Jordan down at Aqaba, but before heading up to Petra, we did a short detour 60 kilometres east of Aqaba to the famous site of Wadi Rum. Now, personally, I quite enjoyed Wadi Rum much more than I did Petra. It's quite a spectacular canyon with many high red sandstone mountains bordering its many valleys. Now, Wadi Rum is best known for its connection with British officer T.E. Lawrence, who passed through several times during the Arab Revolt of World War I. Now, we stayed overnight after our first drive around the valleys. Now here's a couple of magnificent scenes of the valleys we drove through the following day. Now Wadi Rum has been used as a background setting in quite a number of sci-fi films such as The Martian, Rogue One and Dune. Now the red landscape looks very similar to that on Mars, which is why it was chosen for The Martian. In fact, Mount Damon was pretty close to where we watched the sunset there at Mount Damon at Wadi Rum. Now here's my best friend from Wadi Rum. This kitty was easily the most affectionate kitty cat I met on the whole trip. I found that the cats in Jordan were definitely more friendly than the ones in Israel, where they tend to be more feral and poorly fed. Now coming up from Aqaba, I was rather surprised we had to actually descend in altitude to get to Petra, which made for quite a spectacular entrance to Petra as seen in the top left photo. Now Petra was controlled by the Nabateans, who built the place up in an amazing way. Now access to the city is through a 1.2 kilometre long narrow gorge called the Sikh, which leads directly to the treasury. Now the treasury is quite an amazing structure, and it boggles the mind how it was carved out of the red sandstone by the Nabateans. Now, though these photos don't quite show it, the place is completely overrun by tourists today. It was very crowded when we were there. Now the next Nabatean structure further along is the one in the top centre photo, which is the theatre. Now the Nabateans mastered the utilisation of the scarce rainfall in the desert area by collecting the surface runoff into hidden cisterns. Now forming the border between Moab and Edom is the Zerah Brook, which is today called Wadi al-Hassa, which is spring-fed and generally flows all year. Now on our tour to Jordan, we enjoy exploring it close to where it enters the southeast corner of the Dead Sea. Now Baba Drah was a walled city along Wadi Karak that was 4 acres in size and just southwest of the Dead Sea. Now its population was estimated to be around 1,000, yet around the city were over 20,000 tombs. Now Baba Drah was burned by fire at the end of the early Bronze Age and never re-inhabited. It is actually one of 5 early Bronze Age cities found in the area. Now 4 of them were burnt and never re-inhabited. Now the middle site of Safi didn't suffer fire destruction and survived long after the other cities. Now it is actually believed by many to be the site of Zoar, where Lot and his daughters initially fled to. Now one can imagine Lot sitting at one of the gates of Sodom and the debauchery at the Sodom disco, where they would boogie like there's no Gomorrah, as shown in the cartoon in the top right. Now Jeff Robinson, who's in the top photo I took at Baba Drah, said that the Lot Hotel on the other side of the Dead Sea, there was actually a disco there called the Sodom Disco when he was there back in the 80s. Now, back in Brisbane in the Valley, there's a prominent adult shop called The Den. Whenever I think of it, I think of this cartoon here where you can see the den of iniquity down at the bottom of the cartoon. Now, just east of Safi in the nearby mountains overlooking the southeast end of the Dead Sea is what is claimed to be Lot's Cave, where a Byzantine church is that matches what is found on the Madiba map. Now, after we went to Baba Drah, I planned for us to go east to connect up with the way of the wilderness so we could follow the path of the Israelites all the way to Mount Nebo. Now, we ascended from near the Dead Sea, and when we had finally got to the top, we ran across this castle and assumed it was just another Arab or Crusader castle. Now, the ascent from the Dead Sea is some 4,000 feet, and then this imposing castle comes into view. So we decided to have a sticky beak, and we were very glad that we did, as it was the biggest surprise on our whole trip. Now, while the castle seen today has elements of the Islamic and Crusader periods, a fortress stood here long before that into ancient times. Now, originally we were unaware how far back this site's history goes. And we actually found out that it goes back as far as King Mesha of Moab from Ahab's time. Now, two places in the Bible called Kir Haresath and Kir of Moab are both believed to be this site, Karak. Now, Kir means walled city or fortress, and it was here that Mesha, king of Moab, sacrificed his own son to the god Chemosh on the city walls when Israel, Judah, and Edom were besieging it. Now, Karak Castle is actually also a strong candidate for being the Mizpah of Moab, where David had his parents protected while he was being chased by Saul. Now, the Arnon River, or the Wadi Majib today, is a river that in Jordan that empties into the Dead Sea about halfway down the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Now, where the King's Highway crosses the river, it has formed a very spectacular canyon, as you can see here. Now, after I headed home, both the Nelsons and the Robertsons went back there to go canyoning, as you can see in the bottom two photos. Now, a site that the Nelsons and Robertsons visited after my departure was the site of Machaerus, which is northwest of the Arnon River, close to the Dead Sea. Now, the fortress of Machaerus was rebuilt by Herod the Great in 30 BC. Now, after his death, the fortress was passed on to his son Herod Antipas, who ruled Galilee and Perea. Now, Perea covered much of the area of the central plateau of Jordan. Now, it was during this time, at the beginning of the 1st century AD, that John the Baptist was imprisoned and beheaded here at Machaerus shortly before the Passover, following an imprisonment of 2 years. Now, a cave on the road up to the summit is the traditional site where he was imprisoned. Now, the name Machaerus always reminds me, think of the Macarena for some strange reason. It was perhaps the Macarena that Herodias' daughter was dancing to at that fateful feast. Now, Mount Nebo is an elevated ridge located due east of the top of the Dead Sea. Mount Nebo is mentioned in the Bible as the place where Moses was granted a view of the promised land before his death. Now, a serpentine cross sculpture has been erected atop of Mount Nebo today. Now, it is symbolic of the miracle of the bronze serpent used to heal those Israelites bitten by serpents during the Exodus, as well as the cross that Jesus was crucified on that the bronze serpent symbolised. Now, we had a clear day when we were there, but there was enough haze to make it difficult to see clearly much past Jericho. Now, even with the clearest of days, minus the haze, one could not see all that is described, really, unless one was about 30,000 feet in the air. Now, 2 Maccabees 2 makes the claim that Jeremiah hid both the Ark of the Covenant and the tent of meeting in a cave underneath Mount Nebo, and says, "The place shall remain unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. Then the Lord will disclose those things, and the glory of the Lord and the cloud will appear as they were shown in the case of Moses." Now, the hiding of the Ark of the Covenant might explain why the priests that returned from the Babylonian captivity were never able to recover the Ark of the Covenant, which is last noted in the time of Josiah in 2 Chronicles 35. Now, the Moabites, previous to the conquest by the Israelites, controlled the area north of the Arnon River, but that northern part of Moab was conquered by the Amorites prior to the conquest by Israel. Now, a legacy of that prior control by the Moabites is the name applied to the plain on the opposite side of the Jordan from Jericho, the plains of Moab. Now, Tel Haman is the largest tell in the plains of Moab. Now, Stephen Collins has been leading the most recent excavation of Tel El Haman. Now, he believes it met its end as a result of a meteor exploding over it, and has proposed that it is the site of Sodom, which God destroyed by fire and brimstone, as featured in a 2022 issue of Beyond Today. Now, there are some clues, however, which point against this site being the true site of Sodom. Now, Tel El Haman is a little north of due east from Jerusalem. However, Ezekiel 16:46 tells us that Sodom was in the opposite direction from Jerusalem as Samaria. Now, Sodom was in the opposite direction from Samaria as you are facing east, which would be to the south rather than the east. Now, there was also a long break of occupation after its Middle Bronze Age destruction. Now, following that long hiatus, it was then reoccupied during the Iron Age when Israel's prophets spoke to the nation. Now, Zephaniah 2 verse 9 implies Sodom was a perpetual ruin and never rebuilt. So it would be odd to say that a place would become like Sodom if it had become rebuilt. So this is not just an issue. This is not an issue for the other side that we looked at previously. Now, John 1:26 refers to where John baptized, including baptizing Jesus, as Bethany or Bethabara, beyond the Jordan. Now, the word beyond implies it was on the eastern Jordanian side of the river. Now, the photo on the right gives you a good idea of how much the water level has decreased in the past century, thanks to all the water irrigation that now takes so much of the water out of the Jordan. Now, the Jordan is fairly clear and pleasant where it leaves the Sea of Galilee, but is much more muddy here at Bethabara. Now, the width of that river is quite narrow, and you can imagine easily just long jumping over that short stretch of river. Now, an ancient Jewish tradition identifies the site as where both Elijah and Elisha crossed the Jordan dry shod as the same place where the Israelites crossed the Jordan. Now, the site of Elijah's nearby ascension is in a chariot of fire is identified with Jabal Mar Elias, or Elijah's Hill, shown here. Now, down near the crossing, down near the river is a church which commemorates Elijah's crossing and ascension, where he was taken up into the sky by a whirlwind. Now, there's this wonderfully coloured fresco here that illustrates Elijah being taken up into the sky. Now, set back a few hundred metres to the east of the Jordan River are these Byzantine church remains with a pool in front of it. Now, it is believed that the Jordan River has changed its course since Jesus' time, and this is believed to be the location of Jesus' baptism. Now, further north are two nearby places at Tel Ed Dahaba, along the opposite sides of the Jabbok River, which are believed by archaeologists to be Mahanaim and Penuel. Now, in Genesis 32, on his way back from Haran, Jacob meets the angels of God, either physically or in a vision. Now, believing it to be God's camp, Jacob names the place Mahanaim, which is Hebrew for two camps. Now, later at a place close by, someone wrestles with Jacob all night until the break of day. Now, he perceived that this was no ordinary man, but an appearance of God himself. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face. Now, when our Aussie group visited Jordan, we visited Succoth and then began the drive up the Jabbok River Valley. Now, at this crossing point in the top photo, I was able to take that photo of Mahanaim and Penuel. Now, after our visit to Penuel, we drove all the way up that road to connect up with the King's Highway, which is an ascent of about 4,000 feet. Now, we'd climb one mountain, and then we're like at the bottom of another mountain. It just seemed to go on forever. And I'd love to, it was the time of the setting sun looking west, so I would love to go back in the morning when it's not a lot more clearer. Now, where the Jabbok reached the Jordan River Valley is a large tell called Deir Allah, which the Jewish Talmud identifies as the biblical Sukkot. Now, after his reunion with Esau, Jacob built a house for himself and made Sukkot, or tabernacles, for his cattle, and because of that, the place was called Sukkoth. Now, in 1967, an amazing discovery was made during excavations at Deir Allah. Now, some inscriptions were found on a plaster wall there which read, "Warnings given by Balaam, the son of Beor, a seer of the gods." Now, the wall dates to the time of the Iron Age, a time much later, so it's quite interesting that it does refer to this seer. Now, this Balaam, of course, was the same Balaam, son of Beor, who was hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to bring a curse on Israel. Now, he meets with God and is told that they can't be cursed, and then tells that to Balak. And when he tries again and is then stopped by an angel, that only his donkey can see, but he can't. He hits the donkey, and the angel spoke to him as if the donkey was speaking. Now, this talking donkey story always reminds me of Mr. Ed from the old 60s sitcom. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course, unless, of course, that horse is the famous Mr. Ed. Bom, bom. Now, Jerash or Gerasa is located about 50 kilometres or 30 miles north of Amman. Now, Jerash today is home to one of the best preserved Greco-Roman cities, which earned it the nickname of the Pompeii of the Middle East. Now, after the Roman conquest in 63 BC, Jerash and the lands surrounding it were annexed to the Roman province of Syria, and later joined the Decapolis League of Cities. Now, the Nelsons and Robertsons visited Jerash after I flew out of Jordan. Now, we had planned to visit some other sites in northern Jordan, but ran out of time. Now, further north are some interesting sites of biblical importance. Now, along the Kerith Brook, where Elijah was fed by ravens during a famine, are the towns of Jabesh Gilead, which was saved from the Ammonites by King Saul, as well as Tishbe, where Elijah was from. Now, further north, close to the Jordan Valley, is Pella, and then east of Pella on the King's Highway is Ramoth Gilead, which was fought over by Ahab and his son Joram against the Syrians. Now, Pella was a city about the same latitude as Bethshan on the other side of the Jordan River. Now, like Bethshan, it was one of the cities of the Decapolis. Now, what became known as the flight to Pella, sometime before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, tradition holds that a Jewish Christian sect of Nazarenes made their way to Pella and settled in the city. Now, according to Epiphanius, the disciples had been miraculously told by Christ to abandon Jerusalem because of the siege it was about to undergo. Now, the bottom two photos there were taken by Roy Hickford on a trip there back in the 1970s, I believe. Now, in the left photo, you can see two adjacent animal statues, one of a lamb and one of a lion. Now, there just happened to be a nearby Greek inscription, and his guide there surprisingly knew Greek and said that it was a quote from Isaiah 11 verse 6, which speaks of the lion and lamb dwelling together, which is quite reminiscent of the old Worldwide Church of God logo with the lamb and the lion looking forward to the millennium. Now, Amman is the capital and the largest city of Jordan and the country's economic and political centre. And it has a population of about 4 million people, which is about the size of Sydney, so it's a huge city. I really enjoyed Amman and found it significantly more clean and more modern than much of rural Jordan. Now, during the time of the Old Testament, the city was known as Rabbath Amman, meaning capital of Amman. Now, it was here where the Israelites' army was besieging when David lingered back in Jerusalem and had an adulterous affair with Bathsheba. Now, in a bid to cover it up, David arranged for Uriah's death here at Amman during that particular siege. Now, one special sight that we saw heading into Amman was the sun setting over the mountains of Samaria. It was just such a beautiful sunset, and this is a great way to finish off our mini-series on the Holy Land. Now, in addition to my hour-long drone video up on YouTube of Israel called Israel from Above, I'm currently developing a YouTube series called The Geography of the Bible. So in that series, I do a deep dive into the history and geography of each of the individual regions of Israel and Jordan that we've only briefly covered in this mini-series. I'm hoping to have that series completed and uploaded sometime after the feast. So I hope that you've enjoyed this brief flyover Israel and Jordan and found it profitable, and I hope that it's helped you to be able to better visualise where some of the many events of the Bible took place. Thank you.